Here's something we haven't seen a whole lot of. A US franchise traveling to Japan and getting a Famicom game. Of course, this wasn't going to be a Famicom game, and that has made things a bit weird. If you're willing to watch a video about old games, then you're probably already extremely familiar with the most popular children's franchise of the late 80s. Starting out as a parody of Frank Miller's comics, the harsh edges were sanded off and quickly turned into a bright cartoon. When Konami got the license to make a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, they didn't know what they had. The cartoon had started airing in the US at the very end of 1987, but it wouldn't air in Japan until the middle of 1991. Strangely, the show was being animated by Toei Animation, and they had their own game division. Unfortunately. I'd like to think that someone was smart enough to go, who is making the best NES games? That's who we want to make our game. I have a lot of problems with the game, but it absolutely is not a cheap cash-in. The game was intended to only be released in the US, but it seems like Konami felt that the game was good enough that it could stand on its own in Japan. But since the Turtles had never been licensed in Japan before, Konami just gave the game the title Gekikame Ninja Den, Legend of the Action Turtle Ninjas. One weird thing you might notice here is that Konami used the cartoon designs on their box, while the US version uses the original comic book designs. Back in the day, I always assumed it was because they started making the game before the cartoon was around, but the Famicom game was released a month before the NES version, so they definitely could have used the cartoon version of the characters. I'm going to guess that this is another case of Japanese studios thinking that Americans won't like cartoony things. When it came to the later Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games on the Famicom, by that point Japan had gotten the show, and it was successful there under its English title. So those games just used Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the numbering is offset from the US games by 1. The fact that Japan had no idea who the heroes in the half-shell were at the time of this game's release was a complication for Konami. It's why the end of the game has Splinter turning back into a human, April saying that Splinter is her father, and the game itself was not a smash hit. It seems to have done okay, but as a result, it is one of the harder Konami Famicom games to find. You could expect to pay about $25 to $30 for a cartridge-only copy. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's finally time for me to start talking about the game. It's an action platformer where you take control of all 4 turtles and try to stop the evil plans of the Foot Clan and their leader Shredder. At first, they've kidnapped your friend April O'Neil, then they're going to blow up a dam on the Hudson River, and after that, they kidnap your master Splinter. Once he's rescued, you hunt down their hidden base for a final showdown. The big key mechanic in Gekikame Ninja Den is that you can switch between any of the 4 turtles at any time. Hit start and you'll see a map of the stage, and then press up and down to select your turtle. Each of them have their own life bar, and if it runs out, then you can only recover them by finding them tied up on one of the stages. Alternatively, you could get a game over and just continue. All 4 of the turtles have different abilities that you need to weigh carefully for each situation, and then pick Donatello because he's the only effective one. Donatello is so much better than the rest of the turtles that it actually creates a situation where you don't want to use him because you'll need him for when the difficulty spikes. So instead, you wind up using other turtles as sacrificial members. Raphael is garbage, so you just use him when it doesn't matter, and use him as an auxiliary life bar. There's basically 4 differences between the turtles: how much damage they do, how long their reach is, how quickly they attack, and how much their damage gets boosted when they're below half health. Of course, the way that enemies are placed in this game means that if you're below half health, you're really at risk of dying at any second. So the damage boost isn't something that you want to play around with. Donatello has both the longest reach by far, and does the most damage, and his attacks can hit people behind him. He can take out most of the tougher enemies in the game in a single hit. And because enemies don't bounce back when they're hit, if they take multiple hits to defeat one, you're going to take some damage before they're destroyed. Donatello's weakness is that he has the slowest attack, but that just means that you need to learn the timing. It's not a severe hindrance as you play with him. Leonardo has the second best reach, but also the weakest attack. And by weakest attack, I mean that he takes 2 to 3 hits to defeat an enemy, while the turtles other than Donatello take 2 to 3 hits to defeat the same enemies. So being weakest doesn't actually matter a whole lot for him. The reach, however, is extremely useful, and so he'll generally wind up being the turtle you want to use if Donatello isn't available. Raphael has the second strongest attack, but the difference between his attack strength and Leonardo's is minuscule. There's 1 or 2 enemies in the game that he can take out in 1 fewer hit. He also has the shortest range of any of the turtles, and that really makes him the worst to use. His attack speed may be high, but he's really ineffective. Michelangelo has the highest damage boost of the turtles, and since it would be a bad idea to use that damage boost, it doesn't really come into play. His short reach, on the other hand, means he's not knocking out enemies before they can get to him. All of the turtles can augment their attack by picking up a secondary weapon. You switch to that by hitting select. There's a single shuriken, a triple shuriken, and a scroll. All of them do significant damage, but the scroll is exceptionally strong and takes out almost anything in 1 hit, then keeps going through them. It's especially useful against bosses. Another pickup that you can collect are these ropes that you'll automatically throw between buildings to cross. And there's also missiles for the van that you drive on the 3rd stage. All of the stages in Gekikame Ninja Den are linked together by an overworld that's played from an overhead perspective. There are enemies that can appear here, and the steamrollers will kill you in 1 shot if you're on foot. If you get into the van, pressing the A button shoots a machine gun, while pressing the B button fires a missile. The missile will continue straight on through regular enemies and destroy barriers. You hit select to get back out of the van so that you can go into a side-scrolling area. There's a lot of these areas on every level, and the stages wind up being some huge mazes. There's a lot of dead ends where your only reward is a power-up, or perhaps some pizza that can restore some health. One useful thing to know about those pickups is that they replenish if you go back to the overhead view and re-enter the side-scrolling area. That'll help you refill your health. The side-scrolling areas can be pretty tough. The platforming in this game requires pixel-perfect precision, like this infamous jump here on the 2nd stage. Even worse, the game tends to place enemies so that they'll appear in a spot where you have to land, and won't show up until you've started jumping. On top of that, enemies respawn if you scroll the screen too far, which means backing off to clear a region and then going forward again might have you fight the same enemy over and over again. The most infamous segment of the game is the second half of the dam stage, and there's never been a more appropriate name for something. On the dam stage, you have to swim underwater for a ways, disarming bombs as you go. There's a very harsh time limit, and a lot of areas where it's extremely difficult to avoid getting hit. There's also water currents that will push you into things that will damage you. All of the turtles behave exactly the same underwater, so here you really do have to use a sacrificial turtle to get through. But you'll take so much damage doing it that if you die while underwater, then you might as well throw the rest of the turtles away and just continue. You have to be fast and precise to have a chance of getting through this stage. And it's the 2nd level. There's a reason why the 2nd stage was a stopping point for a lot of people back in the day. The bosses in the game aren't especially interesting. Sometimes the screen will just freeze in place and you'll be unable to continue until all of the enemies are defeated. That will feature one enemy coming out for a direct showdown with you. And then there's the bosses themselves. Really, the key to any of the bosses in this game is to stand in the place where they can't reach and either have Donatello attack or start throwing out scrolls. Konami is going to make quite a few games based on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we're going to see 2 more of those on the Famicom. Tournament Fighters came out just too late for a Famicom version. I can't say I really care that much for Gekikame Ninja Den. And honestly, I was never fond of it even back in the day. It's a good-looking game, despite all of the slowdown and weird effects that occur when too many sprites are on the screen. But it controls terribly, and more importantly, the turtles really aren't fun to use. Enemies take too many hits, so you can't fight up close with them, and that really restricts your options. I know people have a lot of nostalgia for this game. In the US, it was the most popular console game of 1989. But popularity is not the same thing as quality.